we begin in the United States, where Donald Trump has been sworn in as the 47th president. He started his second presidency by signing a series of sweeping executive orders. So this is now live in Washington, where Inauguration Day is coming to a close. But Mr. Trump is still due to attend the third and final ball of the Inauguration Day celebrations. It's called the Starlight Ball. It's due to take place at Union Station before he then heads to the White House with the First Lady. So earlier, sitting behind his desk in the Oval Office, the president declared a national emergency on the US-Mexico border, designated drug cartels as terrorist organizations, and withdrew the US from the World Health Organization. The president has also pardoned more than 1,500 of his supporters who stormed the US Capitol 4 years ago when they tried to overturn his election defeat. The senior Democrat Nancy Pelosi has called the decision shameful. In his earlier inauguration speech, Donald Trump said he'd been saved by God to make America great again and that a tide of change was sweeping the country. And in the past few hours, he and his wife, Melania, have been attending various balls. This is the Inauguration Liberty Ball that was taking place just a few hours ago in Washington. Here's our North America correspondent, Nomia Iqbal, who is reporting on the events so far.
President Trump is back to business, and always in front of a crowd.
The first item that President Trump is signing is the rescission of 78 Biden-era executive actions.
He signed executive orders rolling back Biden-era policies, including pulling out of the Paris climate change deal and the World Health Organization.
Could you imagine Biden doing this? I don't think so.
It's been a long road back to power for Donald Trump. He's overcome 2 impeachment trials, several criminal indictments, and an assassination attempt. It seems only a hack can hold him back. He described his win as a divine intervention.
Just a few months ago in a beautiful Pennsylvania field, an assassin's bullet ripped through my ear. But I felt then, and believe even more so now, that my life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again.
As well as God, it seems he has the world's richest men by his side. The so-called tech bros were guests at his inauguration. One even went viral. But to some, on his own social media site X, Elon Musk was accused of throwing a Nazi salute.
My heart goes out to you.
4 years after he was evicted from the White House, Donald Trump is back inside. He has long portrayed America as a country with huge problems only he can solve, but now is the time for him to prove it.
Approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
And he's making a big show of it.
Full pardon.
He's pardoned nearly all the pro-Trump rioters who stormed the Capitol 4 years ago,
Full pardon.
including those convicted of trying to overthrow the US government. It's a reminder of how radical Donald Trump's presidency is likely to be once again. Nomia Iqbal, BBC News, Washington.
And Nomia joins us now from Washington. Nomia, it's 1:05 in the morning where you are, and there's still another ball on the agenda. So the official proceedings haven't finished.
Yes, I think I've lost count of how many balls there have been, but Donald Trump has appeared at every one of them. And in fact, everywhere Donald Trump has gone, he has been speaking. He has, as we have seen today, signed a flurry of executive orders, which gives us a sense of how he plans to carry out his presidency and how he plans to deliver the radical change that he's promised his supporters. But for now, they are still very much celebrating. It's been a very early start for the Trump family. I'm not quite sure when it all ends, but yes, you mentioned there is a ball that's happening at the moment. This one is sort of, I think, the most famous ball, which is for military veterans. But you know, all of this will sort of come to an end at some point this evening, and tomorrow we'll see President Donald Trump's first full day in the White House.
Indeed. And he promised he would come in hard and fast, hit the ground running, whichever phrase you want to use. And he has done so, declaring a national emergency when it comes to immigration, when it comes to energy. But there is a lot of controversy about his decision to pardon nearly 1,600 people who were convicted as a consequence of the Capitol riots of 4 years ago.
He made it a central promise of his campaign that he would pardon them. I've been outside that jailhouse where a lot of those convicts are, and their families are there constantly campaigning for their release. And many of them have told me that they were voting for Trump basically because he had promised to pardon them. But of course, it is hugely controversial, and I think it's worth mentioning that historically presidents have used this pardon in a way. If you go all the way back to President Andrew Jackson, he pardoned all the Confederate soldiers. But I think what is controversial about this in particular is that Donald Trump has never accepted the crimes of these individuals, and some of them are convicted of seditious conspiracy, which essentially means that you try to overthrow the government. He's always portrayed them as patriots and heroes and called them hostages. He's really revised January the 6th and what happened that day, and so that is why it's controversial. But as I say, he had always promised to do this. He had promised to pardon them. We believe many of them will be leaving jail. Some of them were convicted for about 20 years, and we're talking about leaders of far-right groups. But Donald Trump's mantra is promises made, promises delivered.
OK. Nomia, for now, thank you so much. Nomia Iqbal there joining us live from Washington. Well, Claudia Grisales is a congressional correspondent with NPR in Washington and gave me her reaction to the events.
We know that, as you mentioned, Republicans are celebrating into the night. It has been a very big day for this new administration. He did sign a wave of executive orders, and many Republicans are supporting a lot of these plans. This is what they talked about on the campaign trail this past year. They are meeting those campaign promises, for example, addressing the border, as you mentioned, other changes that Trump wanted to enact, such as withdrawing the U.S. from the World Health Organization, the pandemic, and how it was handled after he left office by President Biden was a target of Trump during his campaign and in years prior. And also, some of these executive orders are causing alarm, even for some Republicans. For example, the January 6th, in terms of those pardons for those attackers, the individuals who were convicted in criminal cases, more than 1,500, as you mentioned, and the concerns there that this includes violent attackers, that even Vice President J.D. Vance only a few days ago said that they should not be pardoned. So there's a lot of division within the Republican Party on how to proceed here. That executive order specifically says that the Attorney General will take the next steps when it comes to those hundreds of attackers who were pardoned, but there is no Attorney General. So there's still a lot to sort out in terms of how the Senate will proceed. Senate Republicans still need to approve Pam Bondi on the Senate floor, and Bondi herself will need to deal with that. She heard from many Republicans who did not want to see this action taken. And so we know there are thin margins both in the Senate and the House. And it's just a reminder, it's going to be hard to keep Republicans on the same page, even with all of the celebration of today.
Yeah, as you say, today is very much about celebration, the beginning of this new administration. But he did promise he would come in hard and fast, hit the ground running, as it were, and sign a huge number of executive orders. And the one you mentioned there, probably the most controversial, the nearly 1,600 pardons in connection with the Capitol riots of 2021. But in terms of the other issues that he said he would definitely address, immigration, he's gone in very hard on that straight away, hasn't he?
Right, exactly. Issuing that emergency order for the border is key. At the same time, the president does not have the power of the purse. And when it comes to enacting changes on the border. That's going to be up to Congress, and that's going to be a really big test for Republicans. They have tight margins in the House and the Senate, as mentioned, and it's going to be very hard for Republicans to get on the same page. They're talking about using something called reconciliation here. That's a legislative maneuver where they can bypass Democrats, pass partisan bills, but they would all have to be nearly on the same page. There is little room for error for them to enact those changes. So while folks are excited about these initial steps that the president has taken to address the U.S.-Mexico border, there is still a long way to go for the president to really complete his promises to American voters who put him in office and expect a lot of improvements and a lot of changes when it comes to immigration.
Claudia Grisales there giving us reaction from Washington. Well, I have been told, and we're hearing, that the final ball, the Starlight Ball, is now actually underway. They're enjoying that final ball that wraps up the official events to mark the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States. So this is closed to the press, which is why we can't bring you any pictures of the President and the First Lady and the others who are in attendance. This is for the campaign's biggest donors who are in attendance at this ball. So it is underway, we are told. Now, among the executive actions announced in his inaugural address, President Trump talked about immigration. He declared a national emergency at the US-Mexico border and has plans for large-scale deportations of undocumented migrants. Will Grant sent this update from San Diego.
In his decision to declare an emergency on the US southern border with Mexico, President Trump has opened the door to a number of things. The first is access to more federal funding for US border security, and the second is the possibility of deploying the military here. But that wasn't the only step he's taking on the issue of immigration. There is a whole host of others, some more controversial than others, particularly the idea, for example, of removing birthright citizenship to the children of undocumented immigrants in the United States. That is sure to face legal challenges because it is enshrined in the Constitution. Nevertheless, there have already been real-time effects of some of the steps he's taking. He has removed, for example, the use of an app called CBP One, by which migrants who make it to the US border with Mexico get an appointment with the US authorities to make their case for asylum. They show that they are fleeing credible fear, i.e. violence from drug cartels and so on. And if they can do that, they then have the right to remain in the US. That app has gone, and around 30,000 people who were due to have appointments with the US authorities are left empty-handed. It is a wholesale, comprehensive effort to change things at the border by the Trump administration as it comes into office, to deliver, as he promised to his supporters, a complete new approach to the border that will be far harsher and more draconian than that seen under the Biden administration.
Will Grant there in San Diego. So what does lie ahead for those supporters, the nearly 1,600 who stormed the US Capitol 4 years ago, who have been officially pardoned by President Trump? Our correspondent Emma Vardy is outside a prison in Washington where some of those inside could be told they may be set free.
There's been pretty dramatic scenes outside this jail for much of the day because many family members, friends, supporters of January the 6th defendants who are currently behind bars here have gathered here hoping to see them walk out of the prison gates. Ever since Donald Trump made those sweeping pardons that have forgiven the convictions of hundreds of people who were involved in the January 6th riots at the Capitol that day. Now, those pardons range from people who committed what's called misdemeanors, lower level offences, also people who were convicted of violence assaults on police officers. But those behind bars are getting released, not only from here, but from prisons in other states too, and others who've served their sentences, well, their convictions are wiped out. There's also commutations for people serving sentences to allow them to be released too. Now, this was a promise that Donald Trump made to many of his supporters. Today they feel vindicated that he has followed through on that promise. They've been celebrating here for much of the day. But it's a really divisive and difficult issue for America. On the day of those Capitol riots, there were many police officers violently assaulted and injured in that. Politicians were barricaded inside, fearing for their lives, and critics of these sweeping pardons say that it sends the wrong message, that for political violence you can get away with it, that it wipes out the crimes that were committed on a very dark day for democracy in America. But Donald Trump has always characterised those convicted for their role in the January 6th riots as political prisoners, political hostages, he called them. Lots of people here supporting them, saying that it was political persecution. They're celebrating the fact that Donald Trump went so far with these pardons, and they can't wait to see them walk out prison gates.
Emma Vardy there with a look at what the outlook is for those who have received pardons from President Trump around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.